I'm here with Carl-Ludwig Holtfrerich. Thank you for spending some time with us. In your remarks earlier today, you drew a parallel between the financial experiences of the U.S. in the 19th century and the Eurozone today. How far would you push those parallels? Do you think that in some sense Europe today is perhaps where the U.S. was maybe 150 years ago?
Oh no, definitely not. There are quite some differences. But my question was, do the state debt crises in Greece, Ireland and Portugal endanger the euro as a currency? Because this contention is used as an argument to win over the population in the stronger European countries to back the government with their attempt at rescuing Greece, Ireland and Portugal. I used the state debt crises in the 1840s in this country with a full-fledged central government and with defaults of 9 states practically out of 27, to look whether this endangered the common currency, the US dollar at the time, or the borrowing conditions of the central government or of other states that did not default, because this is being argued by our government, for example, that if we don't help out those states, the euro will break up and we will have borrowing conditions that are worse than otherwise. And I can show with the comparison that this contention is not true, that there is no euro crisis at the moment, as there was no US dollar crisis in the 1840s.
And is it then correct to infer from that that the core countries, Germany and others, should simply let the countries in the periphery suffering now default?
You could draw that conclusion and leave them at their fate, you know, restructuring and all that. But as I am very much, I'm a convinced European. And I think the final reason why the German government, for example, that resisted rescue operations in the first month after the outbreak of the crisis, why the German government finally consented to rescue operations at the moment with a lot of opposition among the population against further integration of Europe, political integration especially. The crisis provides a situation in which governments can push ahead. I mean, they make use of the fear of the population that the euro is maybe in danger and they lose, you know, like inflation is threatening. And so then they can go forward and help out the countries in difficulty, which in essence is, you know, a fiscal transfer which should, according to the letter of the treaty, not occur, because there's no bailout clause in the treaty that was put in there to acquiesce the German population, especially that didn't want to, at the drafting of the treaty, didn't want to pay for the extravagancies of Greece and other countries in southern Europe. But now it's taking place anyway, because the fear of inflation or of a currency depreciation is greater than you know, what the government is doing now in terms of rescue.
But isn't there a risk that that centrifugal political forces in Europe make it ultimately very difficult to convince Germans, for example, to go along with the sorts of institutions that many believe are required to make the Eurozone a healthier monetary union. The Germans are certainly becoming impatient. The right and the French in France is surging. The True Finn party is complicating matters. Do you believe that these sorts of centrifugal or polarizing political forces could eventually make it impossible for European leaders to follow through with the institutional reforms they have in mind?
Yes, as we said in our panel, it's a way to buy time, because in the end, there might be no other solution in a few years than to have the restructuring. But by that time, the banks that hold the debt of these weak countries might have recovered enough to be able to take the loss. Mm-hmm. That's the idea behind it. I think eventually we'll have a restructuring. Now,
you are trained and you have practiced economic history for your entire career. And so I want to ask you a question about your monetary union in Europe in historical perspective. At least one argument is that monetary union was motivated to fortify Europe after an earlier period of some fairly nasty financial and political crises. By that standard, could you say that it's possible to judge monetary union in Europe, notwithstanding the crisis of the last year or 2 years, as a considerable success?
Monetary union?
Well, and everything that goes along with it.
Yes. The goal of a monetary union was already in the Treaty of Rome, but it was not taken up, the issue was not taken up, as long as the Bretton Woods system of fixed exchange rates existed. Mm-hmm. Now, after 1973, we had the flexible exchange rates. And these created tremendous problems within Europe, especially on the agricultural market. We had a green dollar to have somehow a currency in which to be able to calculate as if we had fixed exchange rates. But the attempts at monetary union, not union, but a monetary mechanism stabilizing the exchange rates, started then with Giscard d'Estaing and Helmut Schmidt, our chancellor. And well, it moved on and on and on. The European exchange rate mechanism, which lasted until it broke up, more or less, not really, but it was loosened so much that it was no longer really a fixed exchange rate system. Shortly after German unification, when the pound was brought down with the help of George Soros. I don't blame him for that. He just made use of an opportunity that was evident to him, and it was an unstable situation, and he could make use of it. Then we had unification. The European partners were afraid of an enlarged Germany would be dominating Europe even more than before, and the Bundesbank. And it was seen also on the German side that the Germans would have to take this fear away from the rest of Europe, that Germany would be the dominant country, especially in monetary matters. The Germans agreed to have a full-fledged monetary union, which meant that the Bundesbank would lose its power, and the power would be transferred to the ECB, that is to all the rest of Europe, they are all represented. And that then finally the exchange rates would no longer have to be fixed or variable, but there was one currency. And I think, although it looked at the beginning as if Germany would lose power and the Bundesbank playing no great role anymore, the common currency was a big boon for Germany. and its export industry. As we see now, I mean, the imbalance is not with the rest of the world, but the imbalance is within the euro area where we have our surpluses. And this makes the German case different from the Chinese case. The euro area as a whole does not have a substantial imbalance vis-à-vis the rest of the world. So Greece is right to blame the Germans for pushing them against the wall, but let's say the Americans are not right to do that, because the euro area as such does not have great export surpluses.
If part of the motivation for creating the euro area was to address concerns about a larger, more economically powerful Germany,
yes,
do you think the recent crisis and the way in which it has been dealt with has undermined that cause and instead caused greater worries that in fact the euro has been unmasked for what it really is, and that's a scheme to Germanize all of Europe rather than federalize Germany, or bring Germany into part of a more federal system?
It looks like that at the moment. The other euro members, especially those in trouble, Greece, Ireland and Portugal, blame it partially on Germany, and especially I know from Greece, when the crisis had broken out last year, there was a very heavy resentment against our government, because our Chancellor Angela Merkel hesitated in the first few months of 2010 to support any scheme to rescue the Greek. And that created a tremendous resentment in that country. On the other hand, I must say that the boom that has developed in Germany, in contrast to especially the southern European countries, I mean, France is also somehow in a better position now than many other countries in Europe. The boom that has developed is also beneficial for the rest of Europe. The latest figures I had 2 days ago on the development of a German external trade says that yes, our export growth is still very high, but our import growth has been higher in the last year. Let's say 15% export growth, but 18 to 20% import growth. This means that we are drawing, like a locomotive, we are drawing the others out of the doldrums. So.
Now we're here at a conference dedicated to new economic thinking. Mm-hmm. And I find it striking, and I wonder whether you do as well, how much the new economic thinking that's being discussed here comes from old economic thinkers, whether it's Keynes or Minsky, yes, or Schumpeter.
Yes.
What do you make of that?
The newness in this Institute of New Economic Thinking is the sorting out of traditional thinking, recipes that have gone under and that can be rescued from under there to be applied in a different way. One thing is certain, that mainstream economics is incapable of interpreting or explaining crises like the last financial crisis. To them it came as a big surprise, and therefore we cannot apply the same models, mainly neoclassical models with rational expectations or efficient market hypotheses, ignore lessons from economic history. We have to adapt maybe going back to Keynes, but also to other people in the past, we have to adapt to the new situation and find a new way of economic policy making. And the theoretical basis for economic policy should be a different one than the one that was applied before the crisis. That privatization, deregulation and all that stuff, which was sold to the public as improving productivity, efficiency, evidently was a dead end, you know, and it has been pushed too far. I mean, of course, sometimes privatization or deregulation can be beneficial, but especially in the financial field, it was disastrous. And it was a race to the bottom between different governments. You know, the Americans have deregulated, and the British, and now we in Germany, even the social democratic government under Schröder deregulated on a big scale, you know. We do not want the business of Frankfurt to go to London and New York. We want to have a share here in Frankfurt. So they went along. This has to be avoided, and therefore new regulation should be coordinated worldwide. Otherwise, there is the danger that maybe after an intermission of some re-regulation, you know, the race to the bottom will start again under the pressure of the financial industry, of course. If you let things run laissez-faire in the old style and say the market will regulate it, I give you a counterexample. If you let the market run its course, a competitive market, you will eventually end up with a monopoly. There are many cases in American economic history, US Steel, for example, you know. And if there is no regulation of competition, then, you know, we will have monopolies all over, and the people who pay are the citizens, you know. And the profits are much bigger than they are under competitive conditions. So there has to be, beyond the market, some government institution that is giving order to the market and rules to the market by law and by other means, you know, with certain institutions that constantly supervise conditions. The position everything the government does is bad, is totally ignorant of what markets really need.
Well, Carl, thank you very much for your insightful comments.
You're welcome.